So, yeah, it was not surprising that he was Mrs. Francisco's great-grandfather. We've already said that. Mrs. Francisco was able to identify the names for 2 more sons, Emmanuel and Meriwa. For the other 4 in Table 1, I've used the pseudonyms unknown 1, Lambe, unknown. Meriwa, again, one of the sons, would have been a name brought over from St. Vincent. So although these sons were born in Central America, they retain their names that would have been given them by their mother or father from St. Vincent, like Meriwa. He was the 3rd son in Table 1. There were several such names in the list, some of which are found in Table 2. Out of the 11 names, only 4 were for females. As expected, Gulis's sons, the arriving generation, were the ones most often giving traditional Vincentian names to their offspring. The transition from the traditional to the modern became clearer in that 2 of the women with traditional names were also known with English names. That's where the tradition is giving away to the modern, as you would expect. Amahuni, who was Mistress Francisco's grandmother, who was Gulis's granddaughter, Amahuni was also known as Victoria. And there was another cousin of Amahuni, Diwabas was her name, but she was also known as Victoriana. So the shift from traditional Garifuna names to regular English names. Gonzalez, again, North American anthropologist, adds that in St. Vincent, the Garifuna would have used only 1 name. The practice of having 2 names, a first and a surname, came on being christened in Central America. The first is the patron saint's name for a given day when one was born, and the surname was what was acquired from one's godparents, all of whom, at the point of being christened, would have been Hispanic. So, my name is Palacio. Other names are Castillo, Lopez, Flores, etc., etc. Ellis is unusual. Just to show you there's always something that shows what you're talking about is not normal. This is a good thing about anthropology. You sure? Bam. There's that other example. So what was happening is that the arrivals, the exiles, brought along their Vincentian names. They themselves or their children would have been baptized on reaching Central America. And in being baptized, they would have been given a first name, which is invariably the patron saint's name for that day: Juan, Pedro, Jose, Roberto, etc., etc. And the last name would have been the name of the godfather. And this is why we end up with Spanish last names like Palacio, Castillo, etc. Because again, in my case, when I think it's my great-great-great-grandfather arrived, he was baptized, or his son would have been baptized, and his godfather would have been surnamed Palacio, as you would expect. And so that is how I end up being Palacio at this point in time. One of these days we'll work on changing it, and that's another challenge for the research center. It is interesting to note that we end this discussion on body within the family network with changes in naming that the Garifuna have undergone on leaving St. Vincent. The inevitability of change among a people, including acquiring new names, was no doubt a main reason that Ulysses did her best to embed among her descendants the source of their Garifuna identity. So, what have we said? I have stressed continuity of the Garifuna people across the wide expanse of the Caribbean Sea, from the Eastern Caribbean to Central America. My reason is that these are two marginalized subregions in the New World, where the small woman and man are being challenged by powerful hegemonic interests. Furthermore, climate change effects are increasing the vulnerability of the people within their narrow coastal zones. Finally, efforts at formal regional integration are not delivering in contrast to the fanfare that they generate among the governments. Actually, the Garifuna are only a metaphoric representation of the black, the poor, the indigenous, and the disenfranchised in coastal Central America and Eastern Caribbean. The point here is that even as we study the Garifuna people, they're only an example of other kinds of deprivation or deprived groups in the Eastern Caribbean as well as in Central America. So in doing our work, we are also laying the groundwork for working with other people, which is always important. The indigenous people share information. It's others that use information only for themselves. Maybe this has been our weakness, but the fact is that ourselves as indigenous people, we share openly. And this is something that invariably has a lot of benefit because it's in giving that you receive. The main thrust of my presentation has been to show the power of one type of social science research, ethnohistory, and more specifically, the study of oral history and tradition. I would assert that there are still many more Mrs. Franciscos in our communities who could provide reams and reams of data about our social and cultural history. Introducing the study has been most appropriate for the launch of the International Garifuna Research Center, one of the primary reasons that has brought us together at this moment. There are two messages that I would like to leave with the IGRC. One is to continue pushing the need for as much research as it is humanly possible. I refer again to my experience with the study of our Garifuna people, where information about them has helped to change the way social scientists have looked at our region. The Garifuna have shown, number one, that there are still indigenous peoples in the Caribbean, where for decades the cry has been that we had all died out. Secondly, we have shown that being a hybrid people, part Amerindian, part African, and part other, whatever that other is, could be white, could be East Indian, but all of those elements are sometimes included among ourselves, the Garifuna people. And there's nothing wrong about saying that openly. This counters the colonial mentality still prevalent within the Caribbean that says, yes, we are all hybrid, but the closer one's pedigree is to the Caucasian, the better one is. Another way of saying this is that, yes, we are all indigenous, but the one that looks more Indian is more indigenous than the one that has more black. This is also said in the Eastern Caribbean. It does not make sense. You're either indigenous or non-indigenous. Your skin color doesn't have anything to do with the extent of your indigeneity. Thirdly, the Garifuna have shown that survival for the small and relatively powerless is possible in a dialectic of struggle within opposing forces. A small group of people challenged the mighty British imperialistic design in the 19th century here in St. Vincent. And miraculously, guess what happened? The descendants of those who were banished from here can come back to celebrate the heroism of Joseph Chatouillet, our common ancestor. I'm not hearing any of us. Thank you.